Hey, how's it going? Today we'll be installing some fuel lines that go to the fuel pump. To get the job done, you'll need basic tools. Some of the tools in this video are optional to use. You don't have to use them, you can actually use different tools. I'm using a power probe to power the fuel pump to empty the tank. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna find the inertia switch, which is in the back of the car, that right there with the red button. Unplug it. There's gonna be a pink and brown wire on these cars. You can power that wire with a power probe. That will activate the fuel pump. Just to mention this, the car will be off. The car will not be running when you're powering the inertia switch. As you saw, I'm using a separate battery to power my power probe, and I'm grounding the black wire of the power probe to the body of the car, and therefore once I touch that brown pink wire, I activate the pump by pressing the button on the power probe. Before doing that, make sure you disconnect the big fuel rail hose and then hook up another hose that leads to a bucket or anything to catch the fuel. Just to let you know, you can skip this step if you have less than a quarter of gas, but don't let the pump run dry. Make sure to unplug the connector behind the gas tank before dropping the tank. The tank will have 3 big bolts holding the tank. I believe they're a 13 or a 15. Remove those 3 bolts and the tank will drop. So you can use a jack in between the tank to hold it while you remove these bolts. While lowering the tank, you want to be very careful with the seal that goes around the filler neck. Just in case, it's a good idea to buy the filler neck seal, just in case it rips, because you don't want your tank to be leaking after installing that big hose back into place. Make sure to unplug all the connectors and hoses before dropping the tank all the way down. See, this is the hose you want to be careful with when removing, if you want to save that seal. I jacked up my car from only one side, and I didn't pick it up too much off the ground. I only picked it up a couple inches off the ground, and I had enough clearance to bring the tank down and not stress the fuel lines. So once I had the tank down, I removed the safety clips from the fuel lines and then used the fuel line tool to remove both of them. With the gas tank down, you can unplug these connectors. These connectors belong to a harness that belongs to the connector that's on the back of the gas tank, the one you're supposed to disconnect first. You don't want to stress out the wires, so make sure you disconnect that connector on the back of the gas tank first. This breather hose also has a gasket that can rip, so be very careful when you take it out. But if you want to replace it, this would be a good time to replace it as well. This line is the same as the other ones. It has a safety clip. Once you remove the safety clip, you can use the fuel line tool to remove it. You can remove those plastic clips once you take the whole thing out. The next thing you have to do is unbolt a couple of 8s that are on this bracket that holds the filter. There is 4 8s you have to unbolt. Once you remove the bolts, you have to take out a rivet that's holding the fuel lines. You can use a drill to drill into the rivet and then just pop it out. If you don't have a drill, you can also just use a chisel and chisel off the top of the rivet. I left 2 bolts in place while I was drilling the rivet. So now that I removed the rivet, it's time to remove the bolts and bring out the fuel lines. Finally, the fuel lines are out, and I'm really happy to be changing them because they look super old. When removing these clips, be very careful because they're super brittle. These fuel lines have two types of fitting. One's a screw-on type of fitting, and the other one just simply clicks on.
Yeah, she's at VA.
You want to make sure that it's in between the two bubble flares. Then, once you made sure it's between both of the bubble flares, go ahead and tighten it. I found the wrench the same size as the fitting for the fuel line, and I just turned it a little bit. So I held the line, and I grabbed the wrench, and I just turned it a little bit to make sure it was tight. I made sure the line was tight, then I gave it a little tug, just to make sure it's in place. Once you have that top hose connected, you can go ahead and bolt back the bracket with the filter and everything else that goes with it. Make sure once you put everything on, give everything a little tug test, just to make sure everything's on. So this one will also just simply click on. This line will stop at the bubble flare. Once it stops at the bubble flare, you can put the fitting to lock it in place. Once you connect all the fuel lines, route them very carefully. You don't want to squish the lines while you're picking up the tank. You want to route the lines very similar to the way the old ones were routed. Once you route the lines and you're ready to pick up the tank, make sure you plug in what has to be plugged in. Do not leave anything unplugged. Make sure you double check your work before the tank goes up. I use zip ties to keep my lines nice and organized and to keep them in place. At this point, the tank should be up, so make sure the bolts for the tank are nice and tight. Also, don't forget to put the 3 bolts back on the filler neck. Also, don't forget the bolt that goes in the small bracket that holds the filler neck at the bottom of the gas tank. Once again, these fuel lines are made by Tuning Innovation. Thanks for watching. Please like and share.